The revolution's begun. The time to stand up has come. We are the rocking of the throne. We are the rocking of the throne.
Our first guest, another very, very special guest. I mean, we are very, very, very lucky tonight. We've got three great guests, actually four, is Victor Tiffany. Victor's the coordinator of the New York chapter of Move to Amend, great friends and partners that we've worked with for many years. He is also the state coordinator for Move to Amend, playing a large role in the campaign for New York State becoming the 17th state to call on Congress to amend the Constitution. He was a former senior columnist for the Amendment Gazette and author of Standing on the Edge of the Next American Revolution. He was a nationally ranked political examiner during last year's primaries. Victor is co-founder of Revolt Against Plutocracy and founder and chief administrator of the 2016 Democratic Party primary strategy called Burn Your Bus. Victor has an MA in the social sciences from Binghamton University. He was active in the Nuclear Freeze campaign in the 80s. And after the Citizens United versus FTC decision, became active in the movement to amend the Constitution to overturn Citizens United and all related decisions. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you very much, Andrea. You can hear me all right?
Yeah, you're great.
Great. I appreciate that introduction, and I also want to thank Dan and Carrie Marks for inviting me to make this presentation tonight, as well as Harriet Haywood and Adam Weitzman and other people who are in the background of this conference call. I've been participating with this for coming on 3 years now, and I can't say enough about what I've learned about free trade and corporate globalization. It's kind of a combination graduate seminar and horror movie, with each scene getting more and more frightening. But there's always something put forward that gives us hope that we can do something about this onslaught of corporate law. And tonight, I'm going to be presenting that, and Tim's going to be presenting the horror story about NAFTA. So when we use a phrase like or bust, or else, or lose in November, or trash the Democratic Party, anything like that, is an expression of election leverage, primary leverage. If you don't support our candidate, your candidate is going to lose in November. We discovered this undertaking the Burn Your Bust effort. We were going to call our midterm strategy progressive or bust, but we had the problem of trying to figure out how to determine really who the real progressives are, who's funding them, how do we do that research? Because, as we know, sometimes neoliberals make the claim, I'm a progressive. I won't mention any names. So we had to find a way to get around that problem. And another problem with progressive, like any other political label, is it turns some people off. Whether you say Tea Party or liberal or conservative or progressive, you're automatically turning over half the population off without even them venturing forward to find out what it is you're talking about. So we're drop progressive or bust. Instead, CFAR or else is a paradigm-shifting, transpartisan, game-changing election strategy for the 2018 midterms only. In 2020, we will figure out the next strategy. CFAR is a contract for American renewal. It's been in development for 5 years, and it takes the guesswork out of determining who we're going to support for Congress. You don't have to do any research. If they can CFAR their candidate who's worth supporting, and it prioritizes issues over personality and height and looks and age and sex and all those other intangibles. Next slide. I wanted to start with that quote by Lincoln because it so fits this frame. The best way to predict your future is to create it. This CFAR route strategy flips the relationship between candidate and voter upside down. That's not own. That's a little typo there. Think about the way it works now. Someone says, I'm going to run for Congress, right? They set up a committee and then put forward a platform and make promises. And then the voters look at these candidates and determine who among A, B, C, or D they're going to support. I like candidate C's values. I'm going to donate money to candidate C and work for that candidate. This takes that away. This flips that relationship. Instead of that process, it's the voters who go to the candidates and say, here's our agenda. Sign the dotted line, or else we're going to find someone else who will. CFAR or else. This voter empowerment is the only revolutionary characteristic of this entire strategy. The CFAR itself is pretty mainstream American. Next screen, please. It's based on 11 populist policy positions. It's a template that includes these 5 policy positions: $15 an hour minimum wage, massive investment infrastructure, measures to address climate change, including transforming the energy sector into sustainable sources, and the war in Afghanistan, implement progressive estate tax. Next frame. Next frame, please. Reform the tax regulations to discourage outsourcing, expand and protect Social Security, work to pass Medicare for all, overturn the Citizens United decision with an amendment to the Constitution, free college tuition for all qualified students. Before you go to the next frame, I just want to point out that these aren't positions from Revolt Against Plutocracy. These come from polls. These are positions that come from the American people. That's what makes this a populist platform. Next frame. Finally, the position that has to do most with this conference call is to reverse and pull out of these free trade agreements like CAFTA, NAFTA, and the PNTR. Think about Brexit, right? That wasn't a vote on what they're going to do next. That was a vote on getting out of what they were in. So this is modeled on Brexit, right? We just want fair traders to support pulling out of these so-called free trade agreements. And by the way, one more point before I go on. This one issue right here, if we actually had a populist Congress in the next Congress, this one of these 11, this 11th policy position is probably the one that President Trump would actually go along with. Next frame, please. This contract is a list of issues that are important to people, and they have broad popular support. It's a mechanism, which used to be a party's platform, but they're not there anymore unless you go out into the third parties. It's a tactic, a mechanism that has the potential to unify all these disparate single-issue leftist progressive groups into one particular approach toward the midterm elections. It's an agenda that's coming from the people. It's not coming from the elites. The elites in the Democratic Party are offering a better deal, which is a list of platitudes and empty promises. Next frame, please. This strategy, CFAR or else, is a double-edged sword. First, it's a proven successful tactic that left populists can use to weaponize their own campaigns against their primary and general election opponents. They can say, hey, my opponent here is only making promises, empty promises. We've heard them before. They never go anywhere. I've made a binding commitment to the voters of my district. Here's what I'm going to do. And then the other side of this double-edged sword is the fact that it's a populist movement. It is a voters movement. We want to make this as big and broad as bigger than Bernie or bust, actually. Think about the California tax rebellion. That was a voters movement. I can't remember what year that was, but it was 3 decades ago now. But that's the kind of thing we want. We considered calling this a voters union, but some people are turned off by union, and we're trying to avoid language that turns people off and make this as inclusive as possible. This is an effort to unite voters behind a pledge to support only CFAR candidates in the primaries. And if the neoliberal Democrats win the primary, then this will intentionally divide the left and help defeat that neoliberal in the general election. Next frame. So why include CFAR Democrats? For many people, this may be obvious why to refer to Democrats, but I travel in circles with people who are fed up with the Democrats. They hate the Democrats after what the DNC did to Bernie Sanders last year. They want nothing to do with the Democratic Party. But Norman Solomon made an important point in Truth Dig last month when he wrote, "Those who scoff at using the Democratic Party as an electoral tool to oust the GOP have no other credible electoral tool to use. It is the only vehicle that can carry CFAR candidates to their destination, which is Congress. And we're not out for a protest movement. We're out to get people elected. We're out to get rid of free trade agreements and to get them replaced with fair trade." These third-party candidates do have a use, however. They can be used as leverage. They can be used to intentionally spoil the chances of, I euphemistically call them senior Democrats, Democrats in name only, neoliberal Democrats. They're all synonymous. Next frame, please. So we want people to basically replicate what we did with Bernie or Bust and to become leverage activists. A lot of people join the campaign. They spend hours and hours helping a candidate get on the ballot, circulating the petition and then making phone calls. They do all kinds of work. It's all voluntary work. This is a similar sort of thing, except you're not with a campaign. You're on your own. Nobody's your boss. You're going to go out there and you're going to duplicate what we did in the primary season last year. And there's four basic things that leverage activists need to undertake. One is to create this pledge form and place it somewhere online that can be found, a blog, a website. We can even host it on our Citizens Against Plutocracy website. They need to go out and ask candidates to sign a negotiated CFAR. We don't expect a candidate to embrace all 11 issues. In fact, that's not wise because it reduces the chance that 50% of voters will embrace all those issues. So we expect candidates to use a handful of those 11 issues to negotiate and set up the contract as they see fit and possibly extend the deadline. We're asking them to undertake these tasks within 180 days after they take office. If they want to make it 250 days or 365 days, again, this is a negotiation that leverage activists need to first learn how to do, and we have a tutorial for that on our tutorial tab of our website, and then proceed to reach out to them. I have been reaching out to candidates in my congressional district on Facebook. And then they also need to acquire a memorable URL. They can go to GoDaddy and pay for one. It's really not very expensive that way. Or you can get one for free at tinyurl / and you can make it a custom label, anything you want. Mine is CFAR-NY23. That goes to the platform, the pledge form for voters in my congressional district. And finally, they need to promote that pledge form all across their congressional district, narrowing that search, narrowing that promotional activity is a tutorial that we've actually not yet recorded because there's a special trick to it. The internet gives you the whole world. How do you narrow that down to one congressional district? And these lists of voters have multiple purposes. First, it's your leverage. Yeah, why should I sign a CFAR? Well, I got 1,000 or 1,500 voters who are committed to CFAR candidates only. Oh, all right. And if they don't sign the CFAR, these same voters are going to be against you. So it's leveraged that way, and then ultimately it's a network of communication on electioneering and for social movements after the election. Next frame, please. So these voters, this list of voters will serve as a network of networks to supplement a candidate's offline ground game, whether it's phone banking, going door to door, whatever. This is to use the internet in a new and innovative manner. And it's building on Naomi Wolf's tactic that she outlined in her book, Give Me Liberty, A Handbook for American Revolutionaries, where she talks about somebody just building a list of voters from their own email account and then using that when they want to reach out to people on, stopping a free trade agreement or helping get legislation passed or supporting a candidate, things like that. She referred to it as being a democracy commando force multiplier. And we're taking that strategy and multiplying it again and applying it nationwide for each congressional district and state. So pledged voters will be encouraged to watch the tutorial showing them how to harvest their own email account for addresses and then break it down in categories of geography, local people, statewide people, nationwide. And again, we're going to take that tutorial and add it to the ones that are already available on our website. Next slide. So this time around we need two websites. One is where we make the sausage, where we train people, show people, tutor people, guide people how to undertake these activities. We actually have a help desk. We can get somebody on the phone with leverage activists if they have a hard time creating their pledge form. If they can't follow along the tutorial, if they can't figure out how to do it, we have someone who can guide them weeknights and weekends. And then we have the candidate's website, Citizens Against Plutocracy, which is nice and neat. It's the wrapped sausage on the refrigerator shelf in the grocery store. It's the finished product. And it has a video of the author of the contract explaining to candidates why they should use this thing, how to use this thing, how to weaponize their candidacies by becoming a CFAR candidate. And just for people who don't know, I have friends who graduated from college who don't understand what plutocracy is. It's a government of and for the 1% of the wealthiest members of society. Next frame. So why CFAR? For voters, if we don't have a transformation of the energy sector, then as a species, we're not going to get far. Civilization will be collapsing within a few decades, and the species itself may become extinct if we don't get a handle on this climate change. And for candidates, if they don't see far, they're not going far. I mean, that's our promise, that's our threat, that's our leverage. It's built and based upon a CFAR voter empowerment pledge. And if you can't see far, after all, you might be a neoliberal. So we're thinking big. We're trying to build the buzz around CFAR. Are you a CFAR voter? Are you a CFAR candidate? I'm a CFAR voter. How come you're not a CFAR candidate? We're going to start building this buzz in the media, online, on social media, much the same way as we did Bernie or Bust. And that's in the coming months. And then we're going to build more aggressive strategies. After that, I will be on Tim Black TV this coming Thursday night, elaborating on many of these points. And there will be more time for people to call in if you don't get your question answered tonight. So if you think about just the trade policy position alone, that would be an American Brexit. That would be a big deal, pulling out of the neoliberal agenda of corporate globalization. This is a big deal. We're aiming for an American Reformation. And it's time to think big and think, if not optimistically, at least powerfully. The voters can use our power, can use a pledge form to exercise power in revolutionary and unprecedented ways. And one more quick point before I stop speaking is I didn't have a frame for this because I thought of it after the deadline for submitting frames, but the contract itself claims it is illegally binding. But as Tim is likely to point out readily as a law professor, these things don't get upheld in court. Candidates' promises don't get upheld in court when they are taken to court, and chances are very slender that this would actually be upheld in court. So one of the things a candidate might want to do, rather than having his or her opponent say, hey, candidate Smith signed a contract that lies to voters, claiming it's legally binding. The last thing you want is your name in the same sentence with lies to voters. So when after a candidate downloads and before he or her signs it, they might want to change legally binding to morally binding contract or morally binding agreement with voters, and that way they'd be protected both from this potential of having to go to court on one hand, and the potential of having their opponents say, "Hey, that guy signed a contract that's lying to people." So that's our strategy for 2018. Thank you.
Revolt Against Plutocracy won't just be covering the news about the necessary revolution in the United States. Sometimes we'll be making the news. If you want to stay on top of the revolutionary actions and strategies of grassroots, genuine progressives, and our allies, please subscribe to our YouTube channel today.